The mojito wasn't even halfway to my lips when I felt the buzz in my pocket. I ignored it at first, force of habit. Then it came again and again, like a mosquito that wouldn't die. I sighed, pulled the phone out, and saw it. A push notification from my work email, something I hadn't seen in over a year because I had filters set for a reason, and yet there it was. Somehow it broke through. I tapped it open. Subject: notice of immediate termination. No salutation, just corporate venom, typed out in the tone-deaf, smug style of someone who thinks copy-pasting HR code makes them untouchable. Failure to respond to urgent workflow requests while on active status is deemed grounds for elimination. Effective immediately, your role is considered vacated. Per Section 4A, severance protections are nullified. Signed, of course, by my wife's sister, Jenna, Director of HR, Queen of Per My Last Email Power Plays. Her family's company had absorbed mine 2 years ago in a merger she called strategic. I called it something else. I turned the phone toward my wife, still lying next to me on the rented lounger beneath a straw umbrella. She squinted at the screen, gave a dry little laugh, and shrugged. You should have responded. It's your job. That was it. Not, what the hell is Jenna doing? Not, they can't do that while we're on vacation. Just that shrug, that single bored shrug. I'm sorry, did I forget to CC God on my ORI reply? I said, sarcasm sharp as the lime wedge on my drink. She didn't laugh. I didn't push it. I just typed out a 2-word reply to Jenna's email, thanks, D. Then I flagged the bartender, ordered a double this time, and reached into the bottom pocket of my backpack, the one nobody ever checks. I pulled out a slim brown envelope with no label, inside it a USB drive. And in that drive, my favorite kind of document, boring, overlooked, quietly explosive, the kind that only matters when someone tries to screw you with a form letter. While I waited for the drink, I opened the files on my tablet and scrolled, page after page of merger terms, executive protections, exit agreements. I had read every clause 3 times, but one of them I could recite in my sleep. Clause 9B, the change of control addendum. I didn't build my first company from scratch to get played like an intern by a family tree of nepotism. When I sold carefully, strategically, quietly. I kept enough equity to stay relevant, but not enough to draw fire. I accepted a role that seemed humble, but came with key person protections, including an anti-termination clause that made one thing crystal clear. If I was ever fired without a board review and unanimous approval, I didn't just walk away with severance. I walked away with teeth. They thought they cut me out. They didn't even realize they pulled their own pin. Also, and I say this knowing exactly how petty it sounds, if you're still reading this, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Yeah, I know, everyone says that, but the truth is, 90% of people who follow stories like this don't. It tells the team that this kind of story hits home, that you're one of the ones who gets it, so just do it. It's free. It means more than you think. Anyway, back to the war. By the time the second drink hit the table, I'd already emailed the files. Not to Jenna, not to my wife, certainly not to the CEO. I sent it to Michelle Tran, head of corporate legal, someone who hadn't forgotten, who really built the product their company now worshipped like gospel, someone who, last I checked, had quietly added me to her holiday card list, even after the merger. It was short, no whining, no begging, just a line. Michelle, please review attached. Clause 9B, termination occurred without board consent. Equity reversion clause is triggered. Product license implications included. Let me know if emergency session is required. Then I clicked send, finished my drink, and for the first time that day, really smiled. But because the game wasn't over, it had just been moved to my court. The folder had no dramatic title, just exec docs final, no skull and crossbones, no bright red warning flag. It didn't need theatrics. It was a collection of corporate files drafted with surgical precision, reviewed by 3 law firms, and signed during a week no one in my wife's family even remembers, because it wasn't their company to care about back then. It was mine. And when I merged it into theirs, I didn't come unarmed. I opened the PDF, version 14.3, dated just before the merger finalized. The table of contents alone was enough to make a junior associate cry. 83 pages of legal insulation, clauses, amendments, internal controls, proprietary carve-outs. Tedium, if you didn't know what to look for. But on page 57, buried under a block of unbolded Times New Roman, sat the reason Jenna's smug little email was about to land like a brick through a stained glass window. Clause 9b, Change of Control Addendum. It had been a sticking point in the negotiations. They wanted me to stay on as Chief Integration Officer, a glorified middleman between legacy systems and the new infrastructure. I agreed, but only with protections. I knew their executive team, knew they played fast and dirty, knew that eventually someone would want me out of the way. I didn't care about titles. I cared about architecture, control, leverage. Clause 9b gave me all three. It stated in clear, dry legalese that any termination of my position for non-performance, redundancy, or strategic misalignment required an in-person board review, a unanimous vote, and a full exit package. Stock options, intellectual property reversion, and the right to nullify licensing agreements on any products I had directly contributed to or authored. In short, if they wanted me gone, they had to pay for the privilege. Jenna, of course, didn't read it, or maybe she did, and assumed it was just corporate padding. She was always more into image than details, flashy graphs, jargon-packed town halls, people-first slogans, but contracts don't care about buzzwords, they only care what's signed, and she had just nuked the clause. My role was eliminated without board review, my severance revoked in writing. That email alone violated 3 subclauses and activated 2 others, which meant everything she thought she was taking from me now doubled, because the agreement didn't just enforce payment, it enforced consequences. I compiled the necessary documents, original agreement, merger summary, internal bylaws, and 3 appendices outlining IP ownership. Then I composed an email, simple, precise. Subject, termination review, immediate breach. To Michelle Tran, General Counsel. Board Oversight Archive Attachments. Agreement Clause BPDF, IP Rights Appendix C PDF, Email Termination Notice, JPG Michelle. Per the attached termination notice, sent 9:03 a.m. ET, timestamped, I was released from my role without formal board review or vote, in direct violation of Clause 9b and the associated protections listed in Section 14. Please also see Appendix C regarding IP rights, which are now subject to reversion as per terms, requesting immediate emergency review under internal breach protocol. Regards, D. Mercer. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send a calendar invite. The smart ones don't move in daylight until it's time. Instead, I watched the email hit the outbox, then closed the folder and went for a walk down the beach. I didn't need to check for a reply. Michelle was the type to respond fast and violently when protocol was breached. She wasn't loyal to people. She was loyal to process. And this email, it didn't trigger anger. It triggered her duty. Still, walking along the shoreline, I let myself feel something. Not satisfaction, not yet, just a kind of cold containment, the kind that comes from knowing you've been underestimated and knowing they handed you the blade. I thought about the years I spent building my first product, long nights, prototype failures, blood in the code base, metaphorically and literally. Then I remembered the meeting where I sold, how Jenna and her brother, the CEO, had high-fived like they'd pulled off a heist. I smiled at the memory now, not bitterly, not even sarcastically, just like a man watching a house of cards wobble, not because the wind is blowing, but because the fool who built it just pulled the bottom one out himself, and I was holding the blueprint. Dinner was grilled fish and smugness. We sat on the patio of the resort's overpriced fusion restaurant, some place with string lights and waiters trained to hover just long enough to make you feel watched. The ocean purred in the background, and my wife's voice carried through the sea air like a blade hidden in lace. She finally pulled the trigger, she said, clinking her wine glass against Jenna's. It was overdue. Jenna snorted. She didn't even fight it, just said thanks, like a good little lamb. They both laughed, a clean, confident sound. It didn't echo. It stabbed. I smiled, nodded, cut my steak a little too neatly. Jenna was wearing a linen jumpsuit that looked like it came with its own NDA. She leaned back in her chair, swirling a glass of Pinot like she was chairing an invisible board meeting. You know, I almost expected a tantrum, she said. Guys like him, ego tied up in work, Usually they go nuclear, lawyers, phone calls, rage. My wife scoffed. Please, he barely raised an eyebrow. Honestly, I think he knows he's burned out. Then he should have said that instead of going dark for 2 days. Jenna shook her head. HR doesn't stop for anniversaries. They toasted again. To what? I don't know. Self-delusion, maybe. I didn't respond. I just kept chewing like I wasn't memorizing every word, like I hadn't already sent the documents that morning while they were still gloating over mimosa brunch, like I didn't know the legal equivalent of a nuclear payload was now ticking away on a server back in Boston, waiting for a single signature. Instead, I let them play their little chess match, kings and queens and castles in their heads. They didn't realize I built the board they were sitting on. My wife reached for my hand halfway through dessert, the performative gesture. You're quiet tonight. Just tired, I said, and smiled like a man digesting betrayal. That seemed to satisfy her. Jenna, on the other hand, tilted her head and watched me a second longer than I liked. She was always sharper than she pretended to be, the kind of predator that smiled while calculating the cost of your limbs. Hey, she said finally, you good? No hard feelings, right? I lifted my glass. None at all. You made a business decision. She raised her brows. Exactly. And I'll make mine in the morning. That part I think she didn't quite catch, because in her mind it was done. I was done. Stripped of a title, boxed up and shrink-wrapped for disposal. I was the husband with a fading resume, the ex-founder clinging to vacation drinks and post-merger relevance. They had their story, and they'd already written me out of it. But here's the thing about stories. You never notice the narrator until the twist hits. The waiter brought the check. Jenna grabbed it without asking. On me, she said. Consider it a parting gift. I thanked her, with the same tone I'd used in the email. Later that night, back in the villa, my wife dozed off after one too many glasses of overpriced Cabernet. I stepped outside onto the deck, let the wind hit my face, and tapped to open my phone. 7:29 p.m., 1 hour behind Boston. Perfect. I opened the calendar app, confirmed tomorrow's meeting, 8:45 a.m., ST private call. 2 participants, Michelle Tran and me. They'd forgotten the thing that always kills arrogance, process. They forgot that mergers aren't marriages, that agreements aren't feelings, that you can mock a man for going quiet, but you should pray he doesn't stay that way too long. Because silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's a fuse. And in the morning, I plan to light it, 7:45 a.m., sharp. Michelle Tran never arrived late, never rescheduled, never fumbled for files, the kind of attorney who could write case law blindfolded and draft a compliance clause with one hand while gutting your legacy with the other. She appeared in the call window dressed in navy blue, AirPods in, no makeup, hair tied back, war mode. Mr. Mercer, she said without looking up, tapping keys. I've reviewed the documents you sent. Let's confirm some facts. Please, I replied. You're saying you were terminated without board review? Correct. No vote was conducted, no executive session was convened, no severance was negotiated. Correct again. She stopped typing, blinked. This termination came from Jenna Laird, director of HR? Yes. Your wife's sister. Unfortunately, she frowned, which for Michelle might as well have been a scream. And your contract explicitly states that all termination decisions regarding key personnel require unanimous board approval and follow Section 9B protocols. Yes. She glanced down at something on her desk, and those protocols include mandatory severance, accelerated vesting, and conditional IP licensing tied to employment status. Yes. Another pause. I need to confirm your equity status, she said, flipping through what I imagined were several pages of digital hell. Do you still hold Class B shares? 12%, I said. Per the post-merger dilution schedule. Her fingers froze. And are you invoking Clause 14 of the merger terms? I nodded once. Voting parity is triggered automatically for 48 hours post-procedural breach. I have the timestamp from Jenna's email. It falls within the window. Michelle looked up, her expression no longer composed but bordering on alarm. Not panic, not yet, but the kind of legal concern that made counsel reach for stronger coffee and the red folder. Clause 14, she repeated, the one no one wanted to keep. Correct. But I did, and your team agreed after I declined the first draft. They thought it was symbolic. They thought wrong. She stood up from her desk briefly, walking off camera. I heard papers shuffle, a drawer open, possibly a bottle unscrewing. She came back 2 minutes later, now holding a folder. When she spoke again, her tone had dropped several degrees. Mr. Mercer, this is problematic. For whom? For everyone who touched this without checking the language. I waited. Michelle didn't like being surprised. And she really didn't like learning that she might be representing a company that had just nuked its own operational lifeline because an HR director had a petty grudge and a god complex. She glanced to the side, tapping her temple with a pen. One more thing. The IP licensing, Section 17C, it's tied to your continued employment, correct? It is. And you authored the foundational code for the Tyler platform? Yes. Authorship legally documented, in full, registered, time-stamped, attached to my employment as a condition of the merger. She stared at me. Then the termination invalidates the license. Exactly. Michelle didn't respond immediately. I heard a muffled expletive off mic. She muted for 10 seconds. When she returned, her voice was ice. I'll be calling an emergency session. Today? Within the hour. You'll receive a formal summons. You are entitled to speak. Under Clause 14, I'm entitled to vote. She exhaled hard through her nose. Jesus Christ. Language? I said gently. She didn't laugh, but her eyes flicked sideways, calculating. You'll be physically present? She asked. I'll be in the room. I still have building access. I'll confirm with security. This is going to get messy. Only if they resist. Michelle ended the call without a goodbye, which in legalese meant we were officially past the pleasantries. I sat back in the villa's tiny balcony chair, the sea wind blowing across my bare feet. My wife was still asleep inside, blissfully unaware, probably dreaming of spa treatments and whatever Instagram quote she'd post next about new chapters. Meanwhile, a clause buried on page 9 of a document no one read had just lit the fuse under her sister's entire career. They'd laughed at me over dinner. Michelle wasn't laughing, and now the board was about to read what they signed. By noon, the alarm bells had stopped ringing quietly. They were blaring. Emails began dropping like artillery fire. Subject lines flagged urgent, re-emergency session, action required. Directors in 3 time zones had their lunches interrupted. Calendars auto-updated, legal reviewed protocols that hadn't been invoked since the merger was signed. Most of them had forgotten Clause 14B even existed. But I hadn't. Clause 14B, temporary voting parity in the event of a procedural breach by the executive committee, was originally designed as a pacifier, something to keep the founder quiet. Symbolic, the CEO had called it. A ceremonial parachute, Jenna once joked, back when she thought I was ornamental. Now it was an active warhead lodged in the company's soft underbelly, and it had just been triggered. The summons hit my inbox at 12:04 p.m. Subject: Executive Board, Emergency Session, 3:00 p.m., EST location, Boardroom 9B, HQ, attendance. Mandatory. Shareholders with active voting rights. The message was signed by Michelle herself. Formal, precise, cold, but I could feel the tightness in every word. The board wasn't just reviewing my termination. They were reviewing the termination of their own oversight. A second email followed moments later, labeled confidential. Agenda: review of HR protocol violation, review of CEO, breach of fiduciary procedure, enforcement of Clause 9B protections, temporary parity voting activation, per Clause 14B, proprietary asset risk, licensing status of Tyler platform motion to censure, HR leadership, motion to investigate, CEO, executive authority, voting action items. TBD, I scanned the list again. 2 names stood out, Jenna's and Charles's. Jenna, my wife's sister, was no longer the accuser. She was on the agenda. And Charles, the CEO, who thought a founder's compliance was the same as loyalty, was about to have his hands pulled off the wheel he thought he welded to the dashboard. I arrived at HQ an hour before the session. The building still smelled like too much ambition. Glass walls, over-designed art in the lobby, a fake living moss wall someone once described as biophilic synergy, whatever the hell that meant. Security didn't question me. My badge beeped green, still active. I walked in like I hadn't been eliminated on paper 8 hours earlier. They hadn't even updated the system yet. In the elevator, I watched myself in the mirrored wall. No tie, open collar, steady breath. I didn't look like a man begging for reinstatement. I looked like a man who'd written the blueprints to this entire circus and had just pulled the fire alarm. Upstairs, the executive floor was silent. Too silent. The kind of quiet you only get in places where fear has replaced confidence. People passed by without eye contact. Jenna's assistant, formerly all flair and attitude, gave me a pale, stiff nod and disappeared into the kitchen. I reached the boardroom door. Boardroom 9B. Irony of ironies, it was the same room where we'd signed the final merger papers 2 years ago. Same walnut table, same angled chairs, same custom glass pitcher etched with the company motto, "Together we scale." Now it would be the room where that fantasy died. Michelle was already seated. She looked up and gave a single nod, then returned to her notes. No greeting, no fluff. This was an autopsy, not a reunion. The directors began arriving. Some I knew well, some I hadn't seen since the post-merger press conference. They eyed me cautiously, part curiosity, part self-preservation. No one smiled. One of them, an older man from Zurich, shook my hand and whispered, "I always wondered if you'd cash that clause." I didn't answer. Then came Jenna. She entered like she always did, heels clicking, blazer crisp, face curated for war. Until she saw me sitting at the table, she stopped walking. "Why is he here?" Michelle didn't look up. "He's required to be. Voting parity is active. That clause wasn't supposed to be real. It was signed. You breached protocol. He votes." Jenna's face cracked for just a second. Then she turned sharply and took her seat. The last to arrive was Charles, CEO, my wife's brother-in-law, the man who once promised to shepherd my vision into a scalable future. He entered late, like he always did, too important to be punctual, too insulated to be afraid, until he saw the printed agenda sitting at every seat, his name, second from the top. He blinked, once, twice, then his eyes met mine across the table. I nodded. He sat down hard, suddenly less composed than usual. The tension in the room shifted. We were no longer reviewing a termination. We were witnessing the start of a reckoning. They hadn't just fired a key officer, they'd activated the clause no one expected to matter. And now I was sitting at their table, with a voice they couldn't mute and a vote they couldn't deny. I walked into the boardroom with the same calm as a surgeon entering an operating theater, late in the day, but right on time for the procedure. The walls were exactly how I remembered them. Frosted glass with acoustic privacy, white oak panels that made the space feel important, sterile. The long walnut table gleamed like someone had just wiped it down for a photo op. Leather chairs, all occupied, except one mine. 12 people turned to look. Nobody said a word at first. Not until Charles, the CEO, finally stood. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His voice tried to stay even, but it landed in that space between confusion and dread. I didn't answer, not right away. Instead, I walked slowly to the table and placed a single printed page in front of him. Not a binder, not a laptop. Just one page, neatly trimmed, triple-checked for clarity. Clause 14B, highlighted in yellow, signed by him, dated in pen. Michelle, seated 2 spots down, cleared her throat. "He is, read the clause." Charles looked down. His eyes moved, then moved again, then stopped and stayed stopped. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up his coffee cup. Tried to sip. Failed. The cup slipped from his grip and shattered on the floor. The sound bounced off the glass and made 2 of the directors flinch. "I suggest we begin," I said calmly, and took my seat. Jenna was already staring. Not glaring. Not yet. Just stunned. She looked like a child being told the magician didn't really saw the woman in half. She glanced at Charles, then at Michelle, then at the rest of the board, like she was waiting for someone to laugh and say this was all a prank. No one laughed. Instead, Michelle began the session with the composure of a funeral director. "We are here today to address a series of executive breaches initiated by HR Director Jenna Laird, including unlawful termination of protected key personnel. Clause 9B protections were violated, and Clause 14B was thereby activated." She clicked a small remote. The main screen lit up. My name appeared in the center, David Mercer, Chief Integration Officer, protected, 12% Class B equity clause, 14B voting rights, active by expires 48 hours.
The room didn't breathe.
Michelle continued. Under the terms of the merger and employment agreement, Mr. Mercer is currently entitled to temporary equal voting rights in all matters affecting executive personnel, intellectual property control, and strategic integrity. His access is valid, his badge remains authorized, and he is within his rights to be present at this session. Charles leaned back in his chair, face pale. No one reads these clauses to the end. I turned slightly. That's why I wrote them for people like you. Someone at the table, Martin from finance, I think, choked back a laugh and immediately looked down like he'd coughed instead. But the air had shifted, the weight had moved. Jenna finally spoke. This is ridiculous. He was disengaged. He went off grid during a project. While on approved PTO, Michelle interjected, and with no board consultation, you submitted the termination unilaterally. That's not just reckless. It's breach of contract. You can't seriously be entertaining this, Jenna said, eyes darting. Why not? I asked. You entertained it just fine yesterday. She glared. You said thanks. You didn't contest it. I was on vacation, I said. Sorry for not writing my rebuttal in crayon on a beach towel. Another director, this one from Singapore, finally spoke. Let's stay focused. If the clause is valid, then so is his authority, and we're at risk. The word risk seemed to sober the room, because that's the one word that survives every language, every industry, every ego. Michelle nodded. Correct. Beyond Mr. Mercer's severance, which must be paid in full, his departure under current circumstances voids the licensing rights to the Tyler platform, which, as of this morning, was responsible for 63% of quarterly revenue. A beat passed. Then Charles muttered something under his breath. Sounded like Jesus Christ. Michelle kept going. Furthermore, any product updates relying on that IP are now in limbo. The legal department is drafting impact reports. Jenna looked like she was melting under her blazer. This is insane. No, I said, folding my hands. This is contract enforcement. You don't get to play corporate Hunger Games and forget the rule book. Michelle raised an eyebrow. Shall we move to motions? No one objected. And for the first time since the merger, I wasn't just in the room. I was at the table, with teeth. Michelle didn't waste time with a preamble. There's been a material breach of executive protections, she said, each syllable clipped like she was reading a verdict. The boardroom had gone from tense to funereal. Even Charles had stopped fidgeting with his pen. Jenna sat 2 seats down, blinking too fast, probably running through HR handbooks in her mind, as if one of them might still save her, as if the legal bullet already tearing through the company hadn't come from her own holster. Michelle clicked her remote again, and the screen behind her filled with text. Dry, black and white, but devastating. Clause 9b, Section 3. In the event of premature or unauthorized termination of the protected key officer, defined herein as the original founder of Integrated Assets, without formal review and unanimous board consent, all equity-based severance and licensing agreements enter automatic reversion. Reversion shall include, she paused, then read the next line anyway, proprietary control of any products, systems, or frameworks originated by the protected officer prior to acquisition, including but not limited to software code, frameworks, patents, or strategic architecture actively in use by the company. At the far end of the table, a junior director, a guy who hadn't spoken once in 2 years, muttered, "Oh, God." Michelle looked up. Her expression hadn't changed. She was the only one not sweating, probably because she saw this coming an hour before anyone else. She'd just been trying to contain the fallout. Let me be very clear, she said. This clause doesn't just impact severance, it invalidates the license of the Tyler platform. More silence, and Tyler wasn't just a product, it was the product, the data migration tool I had built before the merger, the one that allowed seamless cross-platform onboarding for their enterprise clients. The reason the merger had even happened, the core of their current pitch to investors, and with that one badly written email from Jenna, they'd voided the legal foundation under it. I cleared my throat. To be specific, the license was conditioned upon employment, continuous, protected. You fired the employee and therefore violated the license. Another director asked, "Can we renegotiate terms?" Michelle answered before I could. Not under current status, the license is terminated. The product is now legally classified as proprietary property of Mr. Mercer, but we're using it in, 200 deployments right now? 236, I corrected, and 42 more in active onboarding. You'll be expected to cease use immediately until new terms are established. Charles looked like he'd been shot through the lungs. This can't hold. It'll hold, Michelle said flatly. The agreements were legally reviewed and ratified by this board. Then we fix it. You can't fix what you didn't read, I said. This wasn't a trap. It was page 57, paragraph 4. One of the older board members, a woman who'd joined when the company was still private, leaned forward and said what no one else had the guts to say out loud. We are exposed. There it was. The truth. Bald and unvarnished. Michelle nodded. Which brings us to the second impact. Equity reversion. Mr. Mercer's severance package includes restoration of full share value at the time of acquisition. That's not a bonus. That's the minimum. I watched Jenna flinch at the word minimum. Michelle clicked again. The screen now showed a pie chart. 2 slices had shifted. The board murmured as they saw what was happening. Per the terms, Michelle continued, the reversion allocates a combined equity and IP control package back to Mr. Mercer. Based on current valuations, this constitutes an operational loss of, don't say it, Charles said. Michelle said it anyway. Approximately $71 million in projected Q3 leverage. A sound escaped from Jenna's throat. Not a word, not even a gasp, just the kind of sound a person makes when they realize the floor they were standing on was never real, and now gravity was calling in its debt. Let's not get hysterical, Charles said, trying to regain footing. This is temporary. We'll settle. Bring him back into the fold. You already removed me from it, I said. You don't get to reassemble broken eggs and pretend the omelet wasn't served. Another director tried, meekly. Could we explore legal pathways to reinstate the license? You could, Michelle said, but the likelihood of success is low. The agreements are clean, and the termination was both documented and timestamped. There's no ambiguity, only liability. Jenna finally snapped. You're siding with him? I'm siding with the document you all signed, Michelle said, voice rising only slightly. And I'm protecting the company from further exposure. Charles sank deeper into his chair. They weren't just facing a rogue executive, they were facing the collapse of their core product line. And they had no legal standing to stop it because in trying to erase me, they forgot to read the fine print. And now the ink was blood. I didn't need to grandstand, no speech, no righteous monologue. There was no moment to seize. The moment had already happened. The room was marinating in it. I looked around the table once, made eye contact with the ones who had avoided it earlier, then calmly said, I move to censure HR leadership for cause. 10 words. That was all it took. Michelle didn't blink. Motion is recorded. Given the material breach, the board is obligated to vote to protect the integrity of the firm. She looked down the table. All in favor? 7 hands lifted, deliberate, quiet. No eye contact. 2 abstained, no one opposed. Jenna's breath hitched like she'd swallowed a live wire. Her voice came fast, brittle. No, you can't be serious. One of the directors, an older man with half-moon glasses who'd said nothing all day, looked at her like she was a confused intern. You voided his protections, he said flatly. That clause wasn't ambiguous. It had triggers. You pulled them. I had authority, she snapped. You had responsibility, Michelle corrected, and you acted without review. Jenna turned to Charles like he was her last lifeboat. You're gonna let them do this? Charles didn't speak, not because he couldn't, but because his own job was now tissue thin. The only way to avoid sinking was to cut the weight loose. And she was the weight. You don't understand what you've done, Jenna hissed, turning back to the room. Her tone shifted, pleading now. I was protecting workflow. He wasn't responding. There was a deliverable. There was a vacation, Michelle said. Scheduled. Approved. On record. You didn't call the board. You didn't escalate to council. You didn't even CC his reporting officer. I didn't think I had to. And that's the problem, another board member cut in. You didn't think. Silence. The kind that doesn't just suck the air out of a room. It replaces it with pressure. I watched Jenna scan the table like she was seeing ghosts, the room that used to laugh at her jokes. That clapped at her quarterly presentations. That nodded during her culture redefinition speeches. Now those same faces looked back with open distance, and because the calculation had changed, she wasn't a colleague anymore. She was a risk profile. I need to speak with legal, she began, but Michelle raised a hand. You're welcome to request outside counsel, but effective immediately, your authority over personnel decisions is suspended. Compliance will contact you regarding transition protocol. Jenna sat back, pale, lips slightly parted. Then, pathetically, she looked at me, not angrily, not even hatefully, just wrong-footed, like the script had flipped mid-act and she didn't know her lines anymore. "This is personal," she whispered. "No," I replied, "this is structural." She flinched like I'd slapped her. Across the table, one of the newer directors scribbled something on a notepad and passed it to Michelle. She read it, nodded, and said, "A second motion has been proposed. Review of CEO oversight procedures and potential governance failure. We'll move to that next." Jenna whipped her head toward Charles. "Are you serious? They're dragging you down too." "I think you've said enough," he muttered. And that was it. The knife slid in and no one reached to stop the bleeding. The board moved on like she was already gone. Talking numbers, timelines, transition packages. The air shifted again. Not tense now, but clinical, corporate. And Jenna sat there, watching her power recede like a tide she never learned to swim against. They didn't hate her. They didn't need to. She wasn't important enough to hate anymore, just dangerous enough to cut loose. The CEO's resignation hit the company Slack at 7:14 the next morning. The message was brief, sterile, and utterly full of shit. Effective immediately, Charles Laird is stepping down due to ongoing health concerns. We thank him for his vision and leadership during this pivotal time. No one commented, not a single heart emoji, no gifts, just a digital vacuum where fake respect used to live. Translation: he was done, not because he got sick, but because the company had. And the infection started with arrogance. 12 hours after that, Jenna's new title dropped on the org chart. Director of Policy Compliance. No budget, no staff, no decision-making authority. Her new email signature was missing the bold font she used to insist on. Someone from IT told me she lost calendar access for all departments except payroll and vendor risk management. She now attended meetings strictly as a note-taker. She didn't get fired. She got buried alive. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The punishment was structural. It wasn't vindictive. It was preventative, like fencing off the edge of a cliff after someone's already driven over it. As for me, my severance arrived like a polite bribe. Wired, full, clean, not a cent contested, no NDA offered, because that would have only made things worse. My equity restored, dividends backdated, Class B shares untouched. Michelle emailed me personally. "We've added a formal amendment," she wrote. "No key officer can be terminated without full board review, no exceptions." I replied with a simple "smart," and that was the end of it. Almost. A week later, I walked into HQ one last time. No security escort, no awkward glances, just that sterile lobby still trying to project relevance with glass walls and recycled buzzwords. The moss wall was gone, replaced with a hollow LED banner flashing "Adapt, Evolve, Lead." I took the elevator up, nodded to Michelle as I passed her office, and entered the same boardroom where they'd tried to erase me. I left a manila folder on the table. Inside was one page. No legalese, no drama, just this. To whom it may concern. Effective immediately, the license for the Tyler platform is revoked. No further usage of the product, architecture, codebase, or dependent submodules is authorized. Any violation will be prosecuted under the intellectual property terms signed at merger. Respectfully, D. Mercer. And that was that. I didn't call a meeting, didn't do a press release. I walked out, past Jenna's new cubicle, yes, cubicle, and didn't even stop when she stood halfway up, like she wanted to say something, an apology, or maybe a final threat, I'll never know. Because I kept walking. The next week I saw a dip in their stock, subtle but noticeable. An investor Q&A featured a tight-lipped statement about platform adjustments. Internally, I knew they were scrambling to build a workaround, but the thing about workarounds is they're never the product. You can fake leadership, you can fake culture, you can even fake loyalty, but you can't fake the architect. I didn't sell Tyler again. I didn't shop it around. I let it rest, because this wasn't about profit anymore. It was about precision. They reached for the trigger and shot themselves. I just stood there and let the contract finish the job. I never went back, didn't need to. Some things don't end with applause, they end with a signature. It was a month later, almost to the day, when she finally asked. We were in the kitchen, late, She was nursing a glass of red wine she hadn't earned, still pretending our anniversary vacation hadn't ended with a scorched battlefield behind her. I was packing a box, books, notebooks, things with weight but no sentiment. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, chin tilted just slightly like she was trying to study me instead of speak to me. Was this revenge? She asked. I looked up, not angry, not smug. No, I said. It was enforcement. She stayed silent, but I could feel the storm of her thoughts, circling, splintering, trying to attach to anything that would make her the exception, the victim, the one he shouldn't have done this to. But I hadn't done anything to her. I had done what was already written. She just never thought I'd actually read it. I moved out that night. No fight, no suitcase scene, just a key left on the counter and a door that didn't need slamming. She didn't follow. She didn't call. Maybe she was still hoping her family would bounce back and rewrite the story. Or maybe she finally understood that I wasn't the one who broke the vows. I was just the one who documented the consequences. 2 weeks after that, I started hearing whispers. Tyler's absence was showing. The patches they tried to build internally kept glitching, data loss, compliance gaps, customer churn. Investors started asking pointed questions on earnings calls. The product hadn't just been a tool, it had been the scaffolding. And they'd kicked it out because someone didn't like being ignored during vacation. At a private tech conference in Arizona, a guy I used to mentor pulled me aside. He chuckled, not unkindly, and said, "Next time legal drafts a clause, maybe read it before you sign." I just smiled. Or read it after, if you're feeling lucky. I wasn't on the guest list, by the way. That invite never came. But I was there anyway, quietly, in a booth at the back, watching the new executive team fumble through jargon about agile pivots and strategic sunsetting. They didn't mention my name, but they didn't have to. I saw it in their eyes every time the platform came up. The hesitation, the tightness around the mouth, the half-second pause before explaining what they used to use, and they couldn't say it, but they remembered. That was enough. I didn't rebuild Tyler, didn't launch a rival. I didn't need to. Its absence did the talking. And the clause did the rest. It was always there, sitting in that contract like a loaded chamber, just waiting for the fool who thought enforcement was optional. I wasn't loud. I was exact. And when I left, I didn't take noise. I took the architecture, the leverage, the legacy. I'd written the rules and made damn sure they were followed.